Well, just let me say a little bit about ZS, and then just to provide some context, and we'll move past that fairly quickly. I think our organization is about 3,000 people. We're very specialized in marketing and sales. One of the big areas that we're involved in is sales analytics and sales operations capability building. So I'm going to share some perspectives that come from 30 plus years of pioneering many sales analytics capabilities and helping organizations build those capabilities. And I'm going to approach this a little bit differently today than I might normally approach it. Instead of going deep into a particular topic, I'd like to maybe do something that's different than that, really go maybe on a bit of we'll call it a helicopter ride together. I want to elevate up just a bit, and I want to try to get a broader perspective with you about what is this space of sales analytics? What is it really all about? And of course, we hear a lot about sales analytics. There's a lot of different perceptions about what it is, but I think what we typically don't have is a very cohesive, complete vision around what this space is, and maybe even an understanding of what some of the challenges are going to be for our organizations as we embark on the journey of sales analytics. So my objective in this helicopter ride is going to be to shed perhaps some insights around that. We'll stop and we'll hover over a couple of issues, but I won't tend to go deep. And hopefully at the end of this, then you'll have some perspectives that'll be valuable for you and your organization. So where I'd like to start this whole topic is maybe around one of the most fundamental questions, and that is actually not the question that's up here, but a slightly different question. What is sales analytics really all about? Okay, what is it about? And there's not really a universal definition, interestingly, of what sales analytics is all about. But let me put forward a point of view that I think probably isn't too controversial. Sales analytics is really all about making decisions that help lead more frequently to the right sales resources against the right opportunities at the right time doing the right things. Okay? So kind of a general definition of what sales analytics is about, and maybe if you were listening to that, one of the things that you caught in what I just said is it's about decisions. It's about supporting decisions that lead to right resources against right opportunities at right time doing right things. And hopefully that immediately then raises a question around, well, what are these decisions? What are some of these decisions that, from a sales analytics point of view, we're really trying to enable? And I've brought with me some of the more significant ones, okay? So what are these decisions? Well, there's leadership decisions that sales analytics are playing a very important role in. Leadership decisions like, where are the growth opportunities? What should the structure of my sales organization be? How big should the sales force be? How should I design territories? What should my comp plans be? How should goals be set? Who should I hire? Who are my top performers that are at retention risk? What are the SFE gaps, sales force effectiveness gaps in my organization? And how might I address those gaps? Pretty significant questions that we can begin to think about employing analytics to support. And in fact, one of the exciting things, and we'll see some examples of this in a minute when we talk about analytics, is that there's a field of existing and emerging analytics behind every one of these important questions to help significantly improve the decisions that sales leaders are making, such that we really move from a world where there was a lot of judgment and wisdom that we were applying to a world where sales leaders are really much more fact-based and rigorous in the way that they approach some of these very impactful types of decisions. There's a whole nother body of decisions that we think about when we think about sales analytics, and it's really the decisions that relate to not what the sales leaders or the leadership team are thinking about, but the salespeople themselves. Okay? So analytics that help a salesperson think about their territory plan or their pipeline plan, or provide them greater customer insight, or help them figure out what's the right message at the right place at the right time. What collateral might they be using? How should they be communicating? Is this a face-to-face, or should this next interaction be email or webinar or some other mechanism? When? And some of the time management. So again, obviously a very impactful set of decisions, and the analytics that are emerging behind this, I think, are really quite compelling in terms of helping not just the sales leadership, but the salespeople to make some of these decisions. I think the question back for you and your organization is, how well do you and your organization understand the decisions? How well have you defined the decisions that you're trying to support through analytics and that you should be supporting through analytics? How well does your organization actually understand the analytics that exist and that are emerging to be able to help make better decisions in all of these very impactful areas? Okay. So some pretty big issues that sit there. Related to that, as we begin reflecting on your organization and where you're at on this journey, I think as we begin to try to cut through all of the clutter and get some organization in our thinking, one dimension is what decisions are we trying to support. Another dimension is really related to all of the different kinds of sales analytics that exist out there. There are hundreds and hundreds of analytics that exist out there that can help organizations improve their overall sales force effectiveness, improve their overall contribution of the sales force to company revenue and profits. But all of those analytics really fall into 4 categories. And so as we're kind of understanding the space, understanding these 4 categories can be a useful reference. 2 of the categories are really rear view mirror, rearward looking type categories. Descriptive analytics. Descriptive analytics are all about what happened. So think about your performance reports. Those are descriptive analytics. Diagnostic analytics. Diagnostic analytics are really all about why did it happen, okay? So what happened? Why did it happen? Both very useful things to know, and a lot of very exciting analytics there. But they are also both looking at the past, okay? Those are based on historical data, typically. Another whole field of analytics, and the other 2 categories are much more forward-looking. And some of the analytics that I want to bring your attention to. So predictive analytics. I'll show you some examples of predictive analytics in just a minute. Predictive analytics are all about beginning to understand what would happen if. What would happen if I moved 25 of my salespeople from this region to that region? What would happen if, instead of this message, I went with an alternative message in this particular selling situation? Predictive analytics. And closely related to predictive analytics are prescriptive. Really moving from what would happen if to what should you do? What would be the optimal thing to do? So of course, just 1 inch past the predictive is translating that into the what is the optimal answer. The optimal answer isn't moving 25 of your people from this region to that region. The optimal answer is actually moving 37 people from this region to that region. And if you were to do that, you would maximize revenue and profitability as follows. Be an example of prescriptive analytic. Now, a lot of the analytics attention in the past has really, not surprisingly, been on the left-hand side of this chart. Much more around the descriptive and the diagnostic type of analytics. Where a lot of the action is happening in the future is on the right-hand side. Really being able to move from providing sales leaders and salespeople with useful, valuable insights, but they're not really quite decisions yet. They're not really quite actions yet. Helping translate that kind of information into actual suggestions around what is the optimal action to take, as opposed to leaving that up to some discretion and judgment that might blur the actual quality of those decisions. Let me just, as we kind of continue this, let me kind of dive a little bit deeper. I'd like to share with you just a few examples of what some of these analytics actually look like. Okay, let's get a little bit more flavor of these analytics, and then we'll start talking a little bit about the journey of capability building. So, one example of these analytics, and I'll kind of focus a little bit more on the descriptive side for a minute. Dashboards. We're all familiar with dashboards. And of course, a lot of exciting things going on with dashboards. Mobile, of course. Near real-time data, of course. Those are very, very powerful things. But how aware is your organization of another very powerful thing that's going on with dashboards that we might just characterize by the term user experience? Okay. One of the most significant things going on in the reporting area, in addition to mobile, in addition to real-time data, is the notion of, for instance, sending anthropologists out into the field to try to really understand how salespeople actually work. What do they actually do in their day-to-day business? What does that workflow look like? And to be able to derive from that insights around what kind of information and data would actually be most powerful for them. And what would be the best way to visualize that information and to what kind of functionality would be the most compelling to allow salespeople to access the information in a way that's very intuitive to them, okay? That's very actionable for them. And imagine this, that might even be fun to use, such that we move out of a world that actually we've been living in for a long time, where we do a lot of processing and make a lot of investments to create dashboards and reports that, lo and behold, our click-through rates have told us that aren't actually being used. Okay, 50, 60, 70% of our salespeople not actually engaging, to a world where we're putting out dashboards that are creating real value for salespeople and being embraced by salespeople. user experience. So how well does your organization understand some of those kinds of dynamics that are happening even in this area that's fairly well understood, dashboards. Another kind of exciting thing that's going on in the analytics space. So, analytics, where do our minds go? Oftentimes it goes towards numeric data, the kinds of analytics that we can do with numeric data. And of course, a lot of fun things that we can do there. But how well does your organization actually understand some of the new kinds of information sources and how to mine those information sources? Case in point, this is coming from this is a life sciences company in the diabetes area, seeing significant drop-off in their patient utilization of their products and really just trying to figure out why. And realizing that they have a gold mine of data that's actually not numeric data. They realized the gold mine of data was actually voice recordings, patients calling into their call centers with complaints and questions. So the analytics that this enabled were kind of exciting analytics, kind of pioneering analytics, able to take those voice recordings and apply some of the new technologies that have emerged to convert voice to text very accurately, and then taking analytics tools that are really geared towards text, mining text data, with much the same kind of rigor that we would have mined and analyzed numeric data in the past, to gain significant insights into why patients in this case are behaving the way they're behaving. The big aha for them was a lot of it was related to patients' questions and uncertainty about how to travel with the product. There were some very special nuances. And it gave them some very granular insights around those travel concerns and the way to best address those travel concerns to be able to change these trends. So the question here when you think about analytics really is one of how well does your organization understand, for instance, some of these new types of data and how to analyze that data. Case example number 3 to continue to exemplify this space of analytics. How about the age-old question? How big should my sales force be? How should I allocate those sales resources? How should I design territories? What should the targeting plan be within those territories? Many organizations have almost reconciled themselves to what I would call almost non-analytical techniques. How are they making these decisions? Well, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Whoever cries loudest gets the resources. A lot of judgment, same as last year, or incremental based on last year, or use of financial ratios, which we could spend a lot of time on that, I can nearly promise you, lead to very poor sales resource decisions. Here's a case example of a very large high-tech company. Okay, very successful, very large high-tech company. Realizing that the data that exists today and some of the analytic techniques that exist today can let them move to a very new frontier. They don't have to be stuck with these very suboptimal decisions around such important resource decisions. What did they do? They brought in predictive modeling to understand potential at the account level, okay? Very granular level, at the brand level. So predictive modeling to understand potential at the account level. They actually went even a step beyond that. Not only did they understand potential at the account level, they tried to understand when is the customer most likely to actually buy relative to that potential. Is that potential going to come to fruition a month from now, next year? Pretty important to their sales resource decisions. They then were able to move beyond that. Predictive modeling again. So we've moved into the predictive optimization zone. Next thing they did was they tried to really understand for different kinds of customers relative to their potential. What is the actual workload, Salesforce activity capacity required to execute our sales process with those kinds of customers? And they were actually forward-looking. They were anticipating continued evolution towards consultative and value-oriented selling, which changes where those effort levels are. So let's understand that for different customer types, for different buying situations. Let's relate that to what a forward-looking forecast of what we think our productivity would be if we invest that kind of effort. What's the win rate likely to be? What's the deal sizes likely to be? So that they can actually understand the relationship between the Salesforce investment they might make against a customer and what the financial return is. Can you imagine having that? What's the next thing they did? Brought that all together to be able to make decisions across their customer base. Who should they be targeting? Where are the profitable customers to target? What's the Salesforce effort required to do that? And actually being able to optimize what the overall right size and allocation of their sales force is, knowing that if they were to change their sales force by X number of people, what would be the actual impact on revenue and profit? If they were to shift resources from this region to that region, what would be the actual impact on revenue and profit? So this kind of insight, we've moved out of the realm of squeaky wheel. We're getting pretty scientific at this point about how to optimize these decisions. Finally, relating that back to actual territory design. Great, I now know which customers I want to cover. What is the effort required to cover those different customers? Well, when we create territories, let's try to create territories that are about one person's worth of workload, okay? Because we understand the workload associated with the target customers in those areas. Let's try to set goals that actually relate to the potential in those territories, which we know because we modeled potential at the account level. So you can see here a line of analytics that brings together decisions around account potential, to sizing, to territories, to targeting, to goals, to really optimize sales resources in the deployment of those sales resources. Question back to you, when you think about examples like this is an example of predictive modeling, is how much of this can you do? This is also an example of prescriptive. It's putting forward a vision around what is optimal. One last example, and then we'll talk a little bit about capabilities. So another fun area of sales analytics that's getting a lot of attention is this whole area called propensity modeling. Maybe you've heard this term. For instance, propensity to buy. And in this particular example, what the organization is doing is modeling customer behavior and responses to different messages, to different sales channels employed in different combinations at different times. They're actually pulling together big data to be able to predict, given a customer and the characteristics of that customer class, and given decisions that that particular customer has recently made, what is the actual message and channel that a salesperson ought to employ to have the highest probability of a positive outcome with that customer. And they have something they call a suggestion engine. Maybe you guys have seen versions of this, a suggestion engine, to suggest to their salespeople, here would be the right time to call on that customer, and here would be the right combination of things to do with them. The salesperson doesn't have to do it. They may have knowledge that wasn't reflected in the data. But they're in a position now to understand the facts and to be in a mode where they can edit, if you will, validate and edit what's coming through the suggestion engine, as opposed to trying to figure this all out themselves. Dramatic improvements in Salesforce productivity coming from this kind of modeling and analytics. And at the same time, the other cool thing that's happening with some of this analytics is that it's beginning to create a marriage between what's going on with our digital marketing and what we're doing with personal promotion. Okay, these things don't have to be competing with each other. They actually should and could be synergistic. And that's the type of thing that's happening with this particular organization. So those are some examples of, I think, really what's going on in the analytics space, just to give you a little bit of a flavor for the types of analytics and where some of the leading frontier is in sales analytics. And obviously, as we think about analytics, it's not lost upon you that this is a business capability. In fact, it's a somewhat complex business capability, okay? One of the things that I do is that I lecture at the Kellogg Business School Executive Program. And one of the things that we were talking about last week in one of the executive programs was, in fact, analytics. And I was struck by one of the comments of one of the executives that was participating. The comment of the executive was, sitting back, wow, whoever can get their hands around this analytics thing first is going to have a dramatic advantage in the marketplace. And of course that's true. And the very next thing that the executive shared was, how far behind are we? Okay, my organization, we haven't even scratched the surface on this yet. We haven't done any of the things that you just described. Okay, so this was the concern. And I think there's a little good news and bad news that came with that. Good news is, you know what? No organization has their hands around this yet. We're still in the early days of sales analytics. And the journey that's going to be associated with sales analytics is not going to be measured in days, it's not going to be measured in weeks, and it's not going to be measured in months. It's going to be measured in years. Think back about our experience with CRM. CRM is launched more than 20 years ago. Okay, we're only just now seeing the actual fruition of some of the promises from 20 years ago. It's been a long journey. And somewhat like that, I think we're going to see the same thing with sales analytics. Okay? It's going to be a long journey. It's going to take organizations a long time to figure out how to do all this stuff. Having said that, I think there's something that's going to be different in the sales analytics journey. I think what's going to be different is that there are analytics that organizations can be employing next week, next month, that will actually create very significant impact in the short term. We're not going to have to wait 20 years for significant impact. We know this for a fact because organizations are already employing some of these analytics. Okay, some of the forward-looking organizations are there on certain fronts. And I think the real issue is going to be that this journey is going to be very company specific. What your journey looks like is going to be a strong function of what your business needs and priorities are and those decisions that you most need to enable with analytics. My recommendation and suggestion for you as you begin to think about your journey is to not try to boil the ocean, okay? This is not going to be something that you move to in one step. The real secret sauce here is to identify some of the low-hanging fruit. What are the analytics that perhaps we can begin to focus on right now, the low-hanging fruit that will create impact? Let's focus on those. Let's learn. Let's create enthusiasm, proof points and enthusiasm to do more, and we'll go from there. So I think that's going to be the secret sauce. Now, having said that, in the spirit of analytics, I think there are some challenges that are going to probably be challenges that many of you will face. We'll just share those here real quickly. I think one of the challenges, the elevated mule challenge, maybe we'll call it. One of the challenges is going to be not too little data, okay? That's not going to be your challenge. Your challenge is going to be too much data, okay? We just heard a very interesting presentation on the Internet of Everything. Do you know Virgin Atlantic communicates that a single 787 flight will generate a half terabyte of data, a single flight, half terabyte of data. Why? Because every component on that airplane is wired to be able to communicate what's going on with it. Okay, we're going to see exciting things in the world of data. When it comes to sales, we'll also see exciting things. So it's not going to be too little, it's going to be too much. Now there's a couple of other data things though that maybe I want to bring your attention to, a little bit under the surface, that are perhaps the bigger challenges than the too much data challenge. One of those challenges, I'm just going to call it, is the blind spots challenge. Okay, I've been working with selling organizations now for 23 years. I was at NASA before that, so I do have an analytics background, but my real passion is sales. And one of the things that I've heard time and time again, especially around analytics, predictive analytics, like things like account potential, is you can't do that in our industry. The data doesn't exist. It's never been true, okay? Time after time after time. It's never been true. So organizations do have blind spots around the data that might exist, and those blind spots might lead them to think too little data. It's rarely true. Be aware of that one. The second kind of sneaky data challenge, and this one probably is on your radar, isn't the too much data problem. It is I'll call it the bad data problem. And bad data is sort of a double-edged sword when we think about how to deal with it. Of course, junk in, junk out. We have to absolutely be concerned with the quality of our data. Okay, and there's all kinds of techniques that we need to be thinking about employing around data quality management. No question. Very, very important. But perhaps at the same time, the sneakier challenge associated with that, the other edge of the sword, is that your data is never going to be perfect. It's always going to be flawed. That doesn't mean it's not incredibly useful. Okay, so learning to be able to navigate and mitigate the quality of the data that you have, and recognizing that the data itself doesn't have to be perfect, recognizing the degree of perfection that's required for the different kinds of analysis you're doing, and becoming very adept at helping leadership and the salespeople themselves understand the quality of the data, the implications for how your results need to be used, and how perhaps they don't need to be used, is a very, very critical skill. Because your data is never going to be perfect, and yet it's dramatically better than not using the data. Okay, so those are a couple of things for the radar. Next big challenge I think that you can anticipate, I'm just going to call the fishing expedition challenge. There are hundreds and hundreds of analytics that your organization can conduct with relation to sales analytics. Imagine that I come back to you and we discover that sales are down, okay, in the southeast region. Well, imagine the number of analytics that might lead you to try to figure out why and what to do about that. And so the watch out here, as you're thinking about your analytics capabilities in this journey, is looking out for situations where we create analytics teams doing all kinds of crosscuts of analytics in search for a problem to solve, okay? As opposed to being very laser sharp on the problem, the question that we're trying to address, and the specific analytics that would tie back to that. It's very unlikely that you'll have the resources in terms of your sales analytics teams to be able to go on many fishing expeditions and get much productivity out of such a team. It's a watch out. We see it all the time. And it relates a lot to sort of challenge number 3 that I'd just like to bring to your attention. Challenge number 3 is the challenge of complexity. So one of the areas that we're very, very involved in is helping organizations improve their overall sales force effectiveness. And we've been researching the area of sales force effectiveness for more than 30 years now. And one of the frameworks that we have really derives from some of the results of that research that brings to really focus 30 different drivers of sales force effectiveness. And by drivers, think root cause here. These are the things that as a sales leader, for instance, we make decisions about that ultimately dictate the overall performance of our sales force. They're the drivers, 30 of them, okay? I think, I'm not going to go through each of these, but I think just in looking at this, it should be obvious that the sales force is a complex function. I think, in fact, we could make a strong argument that the sales force is one of the most complex functions in the business. Yeah? I'm not sure that all of our executives recognize how complex the sales function is, but it's one of the most complex functions in the business. And when we think about analytics, that has a lot of implications. Every one of these areas has a field of analytics behind it to diagnose and optimize decisions, okay? So when we get into this analytics idea, the domain expertise required is important. Being able to navigate this complexity is important. And we benchmark against this a lot. Do you know which one of these drivers is consistently rated as the lowest capability? Doesn't matter what industry we're operating in. Analytics right now is the weak link in the chain. And it relates a lot to another challenge I'll bring to your attention, and that is the search for the mythical creature. Okay, so obviously a unicorn, or maybe if you're a realist, a horse with a horn stuck to his head. It's a mythical creature. And what does that have to do with this topic? Well, hopefully we're gaining an appreciation that sales analytics requires a lot of combinations of skills. Obviously you've got to have mathematic analytics skills to do some of the things I've been describing. But you also have to have domain expertise, okay? You've got to be able to navigate that system that I just shared with you. You also have to be able to relate the insights to salespeople and to sales leaders who you may be trying to advise. This is a significant combination of skills. They rarely exist in a single person. This isn't about hiring a few data scientists. It's not about buying an app, okay? You're already off on the wrong mission if that's how you're viewing it. My suggestion here is think village, okay? Combinations of people that really allow us to be able to tackle some of the sales analytics. The analytics fall in different functions. We've got to have a holistic view to bring that all together. Sales ops, the unsung hero, where a lot of the analytics often reside, moving from a cost center to really being recognized as driving sales productivity. Probably doesn't require a lot of explanation. As we go on this journey, let's keep in mind some of the things that we learned from areas such as CRM. Let's keep in mind things that we learned from areas such as .com bust. If a 19-year-old who dropped out of college comes and tells you, you just don't get it, you don't have to buy what they're trying to sell you, okay? There's going to be a lot of hype around this area of sales analytics. There already is. We have to kind of become adept at finding our way through that. So in my last minute that I have here, I've kind of taken this little helicopter ride over the sales analytics space, hopefully giving you just a couple of nuggets in terms of what is this area called sales analytics, what are the things that we're talking about, some of the questions that we're trying to address through the analytics, some of the kind of analytics that we might conduct, some of the things that we might think about on the journey of building sales analytics capabilities. As we come back down, I just kind of want to leave you with a few questions to think about for your organization. Question number one is, what's it worth? Think back to those questions that I put forward to you earlier that related to right resources against the right opportunities at the right time doing the right thing. If we can make better decisions about those, what would it be worth in your organization? Our research suggests that improving those kinds of decisions that I had outlined on average are worth at least 4 or 5% incremental growth, meaning if you're growing at 2%, now we're growing at 6%, that kind of impact. Upwards of 9%, upwards of many multiples of that. High variance in what the impact could be, but for your organization, what's it worth? What are your analytics priorities? Okay, there are hundreds of analytics that you might conduct, but what are your early priorities? What's the low-hanging fruit? You won't be successful if you try to boil the ocean in terms of building your analytics capabilities. We've never seen that be successful. You've got to move in stages. And one of the great focusing elements is trying to understand what decisions are most important to support right now through our analytics. Let's do that. Let's learn from that. Let's show some success. Let's build from there. How are you going to get there? Well, we've only begun to kind of pull back the cover on this question. But there's going to be issues around what functions are going to want to own what kinds of analytics. What's the role of those functions? How are we going to make sure that the analytics that HR is owning are being shared with sales so that we have the holistic view that we need to solve problems and make decisions? There's the data and the quality. There's the skills mix, the mythical creature issues that I talked about. There's capacity and agility. There's decisions around onshore versus offshore. There's decisions around what do we insource versus we outsource. So there's some very interesting questions to think about as you build this capability. Hopefully some of this helps provide a little bit of a reference for you. And I will wish you luck on your analytics journeys. I'm back on the ground now from this helicopter ride. I think we don't have a lot of time now. It just went to 0. But I'd be glad during the break and so forth to maybe talk in a little bit more detailed way about some of the things that we introduced. Thank you.